Okay, class, due to the disruption of our tuition classes, we will try to best to continue with online classes. So for March, we have two classes to do. I am planning to do continue with our dear Mr. Kilmer, which we stopped at chapter 3, maybe 4. I will continue from chapter 4 for dear Mr. Kilmer. And then I try to continue at 7. And for the next class, maybe I will do a report. Starting with chapter 4, dear Mr. Kilmer. Before we continue there, we know it could be a bit rusty for past 2 weeks if we didn't have class. Don't forget the main characters. We all know it's about Richard Knight. Don't forget Turtle Lake, the end of World War I, 1917. We also have the next important character, Joyce Kilmer himself, a famous writer, poet. And the next person who comes into as an important character here, you also have Pa, the head of the family. And we continue with Mrs. Hanson, the English teacher. And another character, important character, is our Hannah Skirmer, classmate of Richard Knight. Okay, so get all this in order, then we can understand. Remember to do dear Mr. Kilmer, the 3 most important characters. As long as we know about Richard Knight, Hannah Skirmer, and Joyce Kilmer, we should be able to answer the exam questions. But of course, we need to know the story. We finished at chapter 3, where Hannah's book was vandalized. You all have the notes. Vandalized, she was hurt, belittled, bullied, and in school. And the one person who rose up to help her was Richard Knight himself. Following that, even the father Stephen, remember I used to mention about the word Stephen, okay? The Stephen was also vandalized by some of the irresponsible characters in the community. We are talking about Turtle Lake, the community. These people are mostly working, having farms. Okay, it was a very peaceful community until the war, which I'll tell you later about, which you also know. And now, during the class in chapter 3, we know, or chapter 2, when Mrs. Hanson, the English teacher, was teaching poetry, she introduced Mr. Joyce Kilmer's poetry. He's a very famous poet, author, writer, working for the New York Times. And when she was there will be one person who will be very excited, happy about reading this poem, because he himself has a passion for writing poems. Who is that? None other than Richard Knight. When all the other class were making noise and moving, they didn't like. This is typical of any youngsters, teenagers, at 15-year-old, 16-year-old students. This class is a class of 25. Do not forget the troublemakers that I mentioned. They tried to distract them when Mrs. Hanson tried to introduce poem, but she told them the important poets play in our lives. At the end of the class, we know that Richard Knight, what did he do? One, he wanted to borrow the book, and Mrs. Hanson allowed him to borrow the book because he was touched by the poem Trees. This was one of the most Joyce Kilmer's favorite poems, Trees. And with that, he saw the address and he wrote a letter, took the address down, wrote a letter to Mr. Joyce Kilmer. Of course, he did not expect him to reply. He's such a famous man, and way he is in New York, and this boy is in an unknown place in Turtle Lake in a state called Iowa, which is very, very far away. Now in chapter 4, to his surprise, chapter 4. You all have your notes. Don't worry, you have to go, so do not have. When after all this is over, whatever note you want, I will give it to you to help you. Okay, don't worry. So in chapter 4, you can use your school textbook to follow, or the notes I have given you notes until chapter 7 if I am not mistaken. In chapter 4, to his surprise, Richard Knight receives a reply from George Kilmer. What did he write to him? About his fear of being rejected, of being looked down. Even his own brother Gus looks down on him when he says he wanted to write poem. What does he do? He writes poem and he hid all this poem in a drawer. Now to